reading from the article that is coming. That's what at least one financial expert is saying. Charles Brown of CB3 Financial says,
one of the brilliant moves that Kmart has done is to partnership with Facebook in these e-gift certificates, so you can actually...
Of government mismanagement. Charles Brown is the president of CB3 Financial Group. He joins us this morning from Chicago.
Significantly dropping. Basically, this is the year of the consumer.
Believe that they're capable of managing anything?
Well, it's sort of like handing the keys to the chicken coop to two wolves.
Good evening, everyone, from Chicago. It's Thursday, October 29th, and I'm your host, Charles Brown, Portfolio Manager with CB3 Financial. We're glad you've joined us. From COVID to the markets to clarity, this is CB3 Live. And what's been the number one topic from you guys this week? Election fears. At least 4 people have reached out and said, so what are your plans after the election? Well, that, of course, depends on who wins the election. So let's dig right into it. Corona America, cases rise, I should say, hospitalizations and deaths lower. That trend has been in place now for months, and it's continuing, which is good. A stunning number today in GDP, 33.1%. The final days of the 2020 election, and I'm sure most of you are glad to see it coming to an end, and all these ads. So in Corona America, what is going on? The numbers continue to rise in cases, 66,784, but the number of deaths, 481, staying with 3 digits, and that is a positive. Obviously, we don't want any deaths, but the trend is still moving in the correct direction. From W Street Analysis, you can look back to April and see 29,000 cases on average per day, rising to 65,000 in October. But look at the deaths, dropping from 2,300 a day to 768. Now, obviously, that's a different number than what I just showed you. But again, that's an average number, okay? So we know that we're making some progress on this, and yet hospitalizations are rising, but not deaths. Okay, so I haven't shown you this number, but this is a worrying scene. You know, I don't like seeing this. The southern states not hit nearly as badly as the northern states, but this is just a longer term pandemic than any of us wants to see. Per 100,000, I should say, some of the Midwestern and Western states, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, seeing more cases per 100,000 than other states. I'm trying to make sense of this data, and it's just tough. It's confounding the greatest experts, so that means it's going to confound me. But we do know that this is a great sign, and that is that the COVID-19 drug remdesivir has now been fully approved by the FDA for patients 12 years old and older. President Trump was obviously treated with this. It's been a couple weeks now, and he has been telling the world that he felt 15 years younger. I think some of that is positioning, but the reality is that now it's just got to start the distribution phase. And of course, when you're talking about passing out hundreds of millions of doses of vaccines across the world, it takes time. But this is the first emergency use approval by the FDA, and that is a very positive sign. Rather than show you the individual companies, I just rounded them up here. 44 companies have made clinical trials. 10 have advanced to phase 3. It's really a staggering number. The competition and even people like GlaxoSmithKline that have been partnering with other larger firms and smaller firms. It's really been a team effort here, rowing the boat up the river of trying to solve the dilemma of this pandemic. Again, we've seen the first reaching the finish line. I think over the next few weeks, you're going to see even more of them. One of the troublesome spots, and this is kind of put in here as an ancillary note, but internet usage limits we're seeing all over the country. Really, in case the internet was not a necessary utility 6 months ago, it is absolutely becoming that as the work from home environment continues to be a stretch for America. So I'm saying this to you, just A, so you can know this, but B, also check your internet service provider. Many are providing increased layers, or increased speeds, I should say, increased layers of payment, I should say, or a download speed. If you are not feeling like you're getting a speed that works for your online Zoom meetings, check with them, because the service providers all over the country are trying to make improvements in this area. So what do you guys think? Will COVID-19 sway voters on Tuesday? Will COVID-19 sway voters on Tuesday? Answer A is yes. Answer B, we got a B there, it should be, no. Answer C, well, only if they really don't care to vote. And D, I voted early. Others can too. Pretty straightforward. Let me look in the comments here, see if I've missed anything. Welcome to iStudios. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Yeah, 33% GDP. Isn't that a great number? Hey, Jimmy, good to see you back. Wow, it's been a while. I think we're in all 4 time zones now, but Jimmy joined us from California. Waiting for some answers from you guys. Will COVID-19 sway the voters? We will see. Okay, we got an answer A. Yes. Okay, I think so. In-person voting, yeah, I think that is affected. You're going to see some voting statistics here that are pretty amazing later in the program. D, I voted early. We did. Both Alice and I voted early. B from Martha. Hey, Dr. J. Hey, friend. Good to see you. It's been a while. I voted early. Yeah, I'm guessing in Fort Pierce. So, all right, guys. We will find out. In my opinion, if Mr. Trump loses the election, it is entirely because of COVID-19 or because of how the voters perceived that he handled it. If he wins the election, it's because the economic values across the country were more important than his handling of COVID. It's really that straightforward. In the U.S. economy, the NASDAQ pulling back from its September 2nd high. So we're approaching now a 2-month pullback. Not concerned about it. This time of year is not really favorable, although the favorable time starts in the next few days and goes through the end of November. And then the extended version of this is that we should see pretty good stock performance through about the 3rd week of January. But the Dow is still negative for the year, so is the Russell. The S&P just barely positive, but we'll take it. This is where we are with CG. Almost anyone that's in our list of clients has a CG account, and still 34.5 for the year. At one point, this was up over 40% for the year, but you can see the blue line. It's been a volatile period, but we're still pleased with where that is. If you have any questions about the performance of your accounts, or if you don't have a CG account and you'd like to talk about that, I'm available. This is the big number, guys. 33.1 GDP. This actually is higher than it was during World War II when the U.S. was making massive amounts of machinery, tooling up for the invasion of Europe. I mean, kind of take that with a gulp. Now, granted, you see the blue line here going down at the beginning of the recession. We're still not back to where we were. We knew that. But the bounce has truly been a V-shaped recovery. Many in the media have been telling you it was going to be a K-shaped recovery or some other lackluster version. But folks, as regards to GDP and actually many other statistics, it is very much a V-shaped recovery. Let's go through that now. So the Empire State, you guys remember a month ago, this data comes out every month. I made the joke about the empire striking back. The average employee work week, look at the red dot. This is for the New York Fed area, eclipsing everything back to 6 years. Looking at the Richmond Fed, Richmond, Virginia, eclipsing everything back past 6 years. Let's look at the Philadelphia Fed, eclipsing everything back 8 years. Look at the red dot in case you can't see it. Notice the V's in here, the V-shaped recovery. It's not just in one limited part of the country, okay? It's consistent across the country. That's why I'm showing you these maps right now. Kansas City, not quite so impressive, but still better than 2018 all the way back to 2017 before we had a better number. Again, the regions around the U.S. are showing pretty much a consistency with this V-shaped recovery pulling out of this horrible pandemic. Initial unemployment claims, still seeing that leveling out. It's been this way for weeks now. We want to see this get down to, if you look carefully on the chart, you see those tiny little bars over to the left-hand side, to the far left. That's what we're used to seeing before the pandemic really broke out at the end of February. We will get back to that point, although candidly, to get to that level, it's probably another 8 to even 12 months. But again, as I've been saying since the beginning of this broadcast, we're moving in the right direction, and that's where we need to be. Business expectations. These are business owners, small to large, pretty high. You see the red dot. We go back to the middle of 2018. They are expecting better, and I would argue that that is probably business owners that are in states that are not being shut down. I'm sure you're aware that here in Illinois, obviously Governor Pritzker has shut down the restaurants again. Governor Newsom in California is pretty much dictating how big your Thanksgiving can be. I heard this. I have to just take a minute here. You can only have 8 people for Thanksgiving, but you can go to a funeral of 30. So I saw this article in the Wall Street Journal about this guy saying, well, I'm having a funeral for my turkey. So that's how I'm going to be able to legally have 30 people over for Thanksgiving. Pardon me if that's not funny for you, but I thought it was. Anyway, existing home sales. Remember, this is the consumer-driven part of the economy. The 3 components of GDP are consumer spending, government spending, and business spending. And the largest by far is consumer spending, and the largest of the discretionary items that consumers spend on is homes. Look at this spike. Now, some could argue, well, this is Fed driven because the interest rates are so low, and you are correct. That is part of it. But even if the rates were low, nobody's going to borrow money unless they have the optimism that they're going to be able to repay the loan. Non-defense capital goods orders. Now, you have to take aircraft out of this. That's why I use the aircraft here. I mentioned this last week. Whenever you see Fred on here, the last name is not Flintstone. This stands for Federal Reserve Economic Data. Great data point here, going all the way back to 2014 to see capital goods any stronger than they are right now. And what I really love is this massive V. We've been seeing these V's, right, in all different colors and variations. It has just rocketed back up there, even in the middle of a recession and the pandemic. Now, if we get another couple readings of GDP, the recession will be officially over. But as of today, it's not. I mentioned Cleveland here. Maybe it's because of my Ohio friend on the show tonight watching, but Cleveland actually had the strongest home price index. And you don't think of Cleveland as a really growing area of the United States, but look at this data. I mean, it goes back 12 years. It's off the chart where the home price rising is in Cleveland. That's great. The overall price index of the U.S. is almost up that high. Again, when consumers are buying homes, when they're rolling into more expensive homes, that is a great sign for the economy, and it really helps to pull out of a recession when you see that data. Retail stocks are hot, especially the online, Amazon, even Macy's, Walmart, Lululemon. We'll see. They're buying the stocks right now. The holiday spending is forecast to fall this year, but that doesn't mean that it will. As we all know, sometimes data can be wrong, and we'll certainly talk about that in just a little bit with polling. Okay, so I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by the manufacturing numbers. Remember, we've talked about building. We've talked about the Fed index. Now we're talking about manufacturing continue to outperform, not back to 2018 levels, but certainly back to 2019. Existing home sales, we were talking about new home sales earlier. These are existing home sales, highest since May 2006. That's a 14-year high in a pandemic, in a recession. guys, and it's from the National Association of Realtors. Okay, it's not even a political entity that provides this data to me. So I'm giving you this data. So going into the election here, which is guaranteed to be tumultuous, you can see that the data is strong. Amazon plans to add 100,000 for those of you in Illinois. That's the size of Naperville. Fill in your city here, wherever you are. This is a great thing. And sometimes those seasonal workers end up staying depending on what the after Christmas season flow of orders is. So, California, Georgia, Maryland, New Jersey, Texas, it's really all over the map. And that is a positive for me. I wanted to just graphically show and go back to 2006. Look at this breakout in home sales in 2020. We're right back to 2006. We haven't eclipsed 2006, but I don't know. I just scratched my head and wonder how in the world this can be happening. Again, in a pandemic, in a recession, when so much on the news is negative, and you hear from a political candidate, we're heading into a dark winter. Guys, I'm not seeing it. I'm just not seeing it in the data. And I've always said since March 12th when I started these, the data rules, guys. Look at this V-shaped recovery in retail sales. So look at the red line, which looks at the 2008 cycle. Now that's a very sloppy V. You could argue it's a U shape, but the V shape, the current recovery, is just astounding. It's actually equaling the 2008 recovery in about 20% of the time it took for 2008 to recover. I see this data. I bring it to you because I'm just encouraged by it, guys. I really am. Retail sales control, this 9.1 number, another record all the way going back to 93. That's the summary of all retail sales online. Of course, there wasn't much in 93, but regardless, just great data from the Daily Shot. This is motor vehicles. Now, this is so close here. If you have to lean in, go ahead and lean in on your screens, guys. You see the V there. There's so little space between the left side and the right side. You almost have to get a magnifying glass. When the recovery is so strong, so fast, the V is so narrow that it's hard to even imagine. But look at where we are through September. Well, obviously, we don't have October data yet, but motor vehicle sales just going through the roof. If you need a new car, this is the time to do it, folks. This is definitely the time to do it. And I've shown the number of home sales, but I haven't shown the actual price. You might be thinking, well, okay, maybe so the reason so many houses are selling is because people are selling them in a fire sale. Guys, that's not true. The median price of existing homes, and I can tell you for sure, because I have a client looking in Nashville, I have one looking in Boston, I have one looking in Texas, different parts of the country, and they're all saying the same thing. Literally, homes are on the market, desirable homes, for hours, not days, and definitely not weeks. I'm seeing it with my own eyes, folks, and I can contend that that's a good sign. What about the builders who are building these homes? Their optimism index, single family home expectation, again, that's provided from the builders, off the charts, better than any number in the last 18 years. Is this going to keep up? I don't know. FICO scores, you might be thinking people getting super leveraged and just, trashing their credit scores. Not so. FICO scores at an all-time high, or at least going back to 2008. I don't have any data before that. But that too is positive. That means people are not over leveraging. They're using existing equity. They're borrowing responsibly, which did not happen in 2008, 2009, back when the liar loans, you remember those, when you put nothing down and your payment jumped up 3 years later. So we've talked about what portion of the S&P 500 is beating earnings, and I'm showing a little additional chart this week because you can graphically see, going all the way back to 2006, what's the percentage of the S&P stocks that claim that they're going to make a certain return and then disappoint or don't disappoint. We are at nearly a 14-year high on that. This is the chart that you're used to seeing. This is at 85%. It was represented in the previous chart. This is just the numerical version of it. If this holds, folks, this is a full 11 to 12% beat on what's a typical quarter. In yellow, you'll see the S&P is now over halfway reported. So there are 500 stocks in the S&P, oddly enough. 269 have reported. The average beat is 85%. Really strong. Really, really strong. So guys, what do you think the economy will look like after the election? No different from now. Will the economy increase? Will there be a decrease in GDP? Or D, does it depend on who wins? Okay, what will the economy look like after the election? Obviously, I don't mean the next day. Let's just call it January. Let me look here while you guys are answering that. Okay, hey Kay, how are you? You voted, that's good, Kay. Go CG, thank you, Nellie. Jimmy, you quote me all the time, okay? I appreciate that, Jimmy. I hope it's good stuff. No more shutdowns. We have the right to work and live. Mark, I'm with you 100% on that. And then Kay remarks, not in Illinois. Well, you know what? I'm patronizing a restaurant here whose name I will not mention because they have refused to shut down. And I am sending my business to them, family business, etc. So people from New York buying homes in western states with lower population driving prices up. People from New York, and I'm going to expand on that, Nellie. People from New York, California, Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, buying homes below the Mason-Dixon line, driving price up, and demand is through the roof, and inventory is being driven down, okay? Thanks, Kay. Love the Thanksgiving funeral story. Yeah, thanks, Doc. That's true, man. I wouldn't make that up. I thought it was a pretty smart way to, get around the limitation of the number of people you can have. All right, I knew I was going to see a bunch of D's here. D across the board. We got a C, a decrease. Okay, Fran, we'll see. We'll see. Dr. A, no different from now, okay? And actually, it's interesting. Dr. J's got the only A answer there. I'm going to show you some data that actually supports Dr. J's answer there, okay? We got an A from Deb, and so Jay and Debbie on the same page there. So we will see, guys. All right, the 2020 election, we are in the final stretch here. And for some of us, it can't come too soon with all the political ads, the political signs. Here's the way it looks right now. Again, this is just one poll. There's some blue states on here that I do not think will be blue the night of the election, but this is one poll. And you can look on here and you can see the toss-up states. Florida's being called a toss-up state. Not in my book. Georgia, not in my book. Iowa, not in my book. Ohio, not even close. Just again, based on the data that I'm seeing. And that's because literally at this point in a traditional election cycle or historical election cycle, you will see literally the swing states change hour by hour. And the polls are taken 4 times a day, usually, like 4 to 5 hours apart, sometimes at night. I mean, it's crazy. And then you've got this Helmut Northrup poll, which has only been wrong twice. Look at that, 24 of 26 presidential elections. The only one, 2, that they did not correctly call was Nixon Kennedy in 1960 and Gore Bush in 2000, which of course was in overtime and was only settled by the Supreme Court. But look at New York in red there. I mean, if that happens, folks, it's going to be a very different America on Wednesday morning if that indeed happens. But nonetheless, what does this mean? Well, the early voting, look at this number and just take this in. I want to leave this slide here. The U.S. has hit 120% of total 2016 early voting. And we still have Friday and Monday for early voting. And some states are voting on Saturday. I don't think we're any voting on Sunday. But, I mean, this means we have an engaged electorate. And frankly, I welcome it. No matter which side of the political aisle you're on, the more people we have expressing their opinion, the less apathy we have in America. And most people, if they're going to vote, take the time to learn about the candidate's position. And I think that's also a plus for America. We want educated voters, and we want, I would say, passionate voters, okay? And just because the amount of money that's spent is higher, Biden has spent more than Trump, but Hillary Clinton spent more than Trump. You know, they're coming from multiple sources. You have all kinds of political action committees now, PACs as they're known, that are bidding for the, no pun intended, for the candidate's behalf. But realistically, the message is more important than the money. Two people, George Soros and there's one other guy, I can't remember his name, that are sending huge contributions. Mike Bloomberg, of course. George Soros and Mike Bloomberg sending money to the Biden campaign, and this has been disclosed. It's $100 million. But does it matter? We will see. We're going to know a week from tonight when I come back to you here. So what is the undecided voter, and how are these two men trying to appeal to them? Is there any chance at this late stage of the game of capturing the undecided voter?
The key question in any campaign is, how are the uncommitted or only loosely affiliated voters breaking in the end? That's a particularly important question this year because the country is so divided between strong Trump lovers and strong Biden voters. These are people who locked into their choice months ago and who are unlikely to change their minds in the end. So any movement among that small group of people in the middle, people who are either truly undecided or not really locked into either candidate, becomes critical. To try to get a sense of what's happening with these voters, our Wall Street Journal and NBC News pollsters did an interesting experiment. They reached back to voters we had interviewed earlier this year who, when we first met them, were truly undecided or not really locked into their choice for president. We wanted to know where these people are now. Think of them as the disconnected and independent voters, voters who were available to be persuaded over the recent months. First of all, who are these voters? Well, they run across the spectrum, of course, but many of them are young males, moderate in their political outlook, and not really committed Democrats or Republicans. And what we found when we interviewed these people is that among those who were truly undecided when we first talked to them, they've broken about evenly for President Trump and Joe Biden. And among this group of disconnected voters overall, there's a preference for Joe Biden over President Trump. Now, this is important because President Trump is behind in most of the polls. He needs a break toward him at the end among undecided and loosely affiliated voters. We didn't find that. What we did find that's equally interesting is why these voters landed where they did in the end. Those who were Biden voters said they landed because they were looking for character and decency and because of the coronavirus. Trump voters said they chose the president because of the economy. And that probably suggests the best arguments each candidate has to move voters in the final days of this campaign.
It's kind of hard for me to even believe that there are any undecided voters at this point, but I guess there must be. And again, we will see, because the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett, as you well know, was sworn in on Monday, but she did recuse herself from two in-progress cases, one where the states, I think it was Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, were allowed to continue to count votes 5 days after the election, which to me seems crazy, but COVID seems crazy, and that's where that is. So I don't think we're going to know anything the election night. I don't think we're going to know anything even a week from tonight when I'm next with you. But one of the questions that has come to me this last week is, what are we doing? What happens? Because I think, if Trump wins and everything stays Republican, the market's going to do great for the next 4 years. And if Trump loses, the market's going to be terrible. Well, here's a chart going back from 1872, you see here, okay, from 1872 to 2020, you see that big black line at the time? That's how a second-term Democrat performs. So we don't have that here. We have a second-term Republican or a first-term Democrat. But the reality is, if you look at the more of the numbers here, but just remember this graph in your mind here, but let's just look at the data. Well, actually, this is out of place here. I'm going to go forward because this is where I was going here. 7.45% is the average rise of the S&P from 1929 to 2019 during the 45 years in which one party controlled both chambers of Congress as well as the presidency. But over the same period, the index rose almost the same, 726, the other 46 years when there was split government. Okay, now this is a highly unusual year because Donald Trump, for better or for worse, is a fairly polarizing person. I think that's an understatement. And we have a very acrimonious relationship with China right now. So this could be an aberration, if you will, to this historical data. But if you go back over many, many years, there's not that much difference. Now, in the first few months or even weeks after the winner is announced, could the markets be volatile? Absolutely. But interesting to me, I'm going back here, the number one search string in Google the last 3 days has been, can I change my vote? Now, we don't know if people are changing to vote for Mr. Biden or changing to vote for Mr. Trump, but look at it didn't even start until 10:25. It was a flat line on 10:20, but maybe it's the news coming out about we'll call it the laptop from hell, I think is what the media is calling it, or something that Mr. Trump is saying that's angering people. But I've never seen this as long as I've been following elections. Of course, I haven't had search engines that long, but it's just an interesting statistic to me to see that was the number one search for 3 days in a row. So this is really it, folks. This is the third time I've shown this, but it's the essence. I won't need to show it again. If you think Mr. Trump has done a great job on the economy and that's your number one issue, then you're going to vote for him and he's probably going to win if enough people think that. If you think the handling or mishandling of the coronavirus is really the essence here, then Mr. Biden's going to win. And it's right here. It's just that strong. There are other issues, of course, but those two are what's going to decide it. And early voting, mail-in, court battles. I mean, what we have tonight that we didn't have a week ago is we have 9 justices on the Supreme Court. I'm going to call the Supreme Court a 5-4 majority. Some people would argue with me and say it's 6-3. But frankly, John Roberts, the Chief Justice, has not proven to be a reliably conservative vote. And really, we shouldn't have conservative and liberal justices. They should all be impartial. But it is highly likely that the Supreme Court will be involved, I won't say decide, but will be involved in this election, much like it was 20 years ago with Gore and Bush. Okay, the battleground states, this has not changed. They're still calling Georgia. And I know I have my Georgia fan on the line here. And I think last week you said, Nellie, that you thought that Georgia was in play. I don't see that in the data. Texas for sure is not in play. Pennsylvania, absolutely. Wisconsin, absolutely. Michigan, without a doubt. So what happens here? Is polling worthless or is it just polarizing? You make the call.
We're going to get to work immediately for the American people. And we're going to be doing a job that hopefully you'll be so proud of your president. You'll be so proud.
There's no doubt that the result in the 2016 presidential election was a surprise, at least if you were setting your expectations based on the polls.
In 2016, polls in battleground states showed then-candidate Donald Trump trailing Hillary Clinton ahead of the election.
And look at that. That's the Michigan voters. Yeah, she's ahead by 7.
Pennsylvania is also looking like Clinton country. She's up 8 points.
The latest poll numbers show Hillary Clinton leading Donald Trump among Wisconsin voters.
After narrowly winning those states 4 years ago, state surveys this year show President Trump is trailing again in key battlegrounds. The president is also lagging behind the Democratic nominee in national polls. A recent Wall Street Journal NBC News poll showed Joe Biden ahead of the president 53% to 42%. So some voters are left wondering, how accurate are the polls this year?
Most of the pollsters are corrupt as far as I'm concerned. If we believed in pollsters, we wouldn't be here right now.
So what happened 4 years ago? An evaluation of 2016 polling found that national polls were generally accurate. Pew Research Center's Courtney Kennedy, who chaired the report, says, that report, in combination with subsequent analysis of data, shows that there were issues with state-level polling, including a late move towards Trump among undecided voters in some swing states, which earlier polls missed. A technical error in which pollsters didn't weight their surveys accurately, so they weren't representative of the populations they were trying to measure. And unexpectedly high turnout among rural voters who previously weren't likely to vote. These are some of the lessons pollsters have had to reckon with as they work to accurately capture the mood of the electorate in 2020.
Ideally, a poll starts with a random sample from everybody in the state or everybody in the country. And that's important because, it literally means that everyone had a chance of selection. And it means that the people you sample will be representative of everybody in the state or everybody in the country.
But cell phones have made building that random sample harder and more expensive.
If you go back a number of years, almost everybody had a landline phone. And when you called, someone would pick it up.
A Pew Research Center study looking at response rates to their telephone surveys showed that in the late 90s, 36% of people who were called agreed to participate. By 2018, that number had dropped to 6%. The shift to cell phones brings an added cost. That's because pollsters can use autodialers for landlines, but not for cell phone numbers, which means the person conducting the poll has to manually dial each number. These factors have given rise to new and different types of polls.
Everybody wants to do interviewing online, right? Because that's much more in touch with just where society is at and people's lifestyles. But there is no way to draw a random sample of Americans online.
A pollster will put up an ad online and invite people to come in. Now, that's not a random sample anymore. By definition, you're excluding people who aren't on the internet or might not be on Facebook or a shopping website when you're putting up your ad to solicit them. So not everyone in the country has an equal chance to be in your poll. That means that your sample does not necessarily reflect the public and the world as it really is.
To account for this, some pollsters use a process called weighting, which means they adjust the survey sample to match characteristics of the population they're trying to survey.
Let's say there are not enough Hispanic women in the sample. Anyone who's a Hispanic woman who answered the poll might count for maybe 1.2 voices in the poll rather than 1. If there are too many college-educated men, those people might count for 0.9 voices in the poll instead of 1 voice in the poll. And in that way, pollsters take their sample and adjust it to reflect what they think the world really looks like.
In 2016, many pollsters were slow to catch on to key shifts in the electorate, like the degree to which educational attainment was becoming a determining factor in how someone might vote. That led pollsters in battleground states to draw samples that did not match the true makeup of the voter pool.
The fact that America has become so much more polarized among gender lines and along the lines of education has consequences for polling. Two groups in particular are worth looking at. One is white men who don't have a college degree, often called white working class men. And then let's consider white women with a college degree. These two groups have always been different in their political preferences as far back as our polling goes, but the differences were not that great. But then in about 2010, these two groups exploded apart, and really their preferences on who they wanted to vote for really changed. When you have people separated that much, you need to be sure that you're measuring education accurately.
Kennedy says that in this election cycle, the 3 challenges from 2016 are still in play, but to a lesser degree.
Undecided voters breaking, in a strong numbers for one candidate late. That could happen this year, but what we do know, what's very clear, is that there's just fewer people in that bucket. And in terms of that technical issue of weighting by education, the good news is that many state pollsters who had not been doing that have fixed their methods since 2016 and added a weighting adjustment for education to their polls. So that's good. But not everybody has. Some pollsters still refuse to do that, and some pollsters, unfortunately, still just refuse to, disclose how they do their polling at all. And the third factor of differential turnout, I would expect that pollsters will have a better handle on that this time. It certainly would not come as any surprise, right, if Trump repeats his success turning out the rural vote.
We say that a poll is a snapshot in time. It's what's happening right now at the time we take the poll. But there's no way around the fact that people look to these polls as an indicator of what's going to happen, who's going to win, and they project forward. But a poll can't tell you for sure who's going to vote. We can only tell you what people are saying now. And as the electorate changes and as their preferences change, polling needs to make sure that it's up to the moment in accounting for what's changing in the electorate.
I'll tell you one thing I've noticed is that the number of focus groups, you remember how they used to have, I forget the guy's name, Frank something, would do these focus groups and he'd point to people in the crowd and so you say you're undecided, and you say you're undecided. I'm not seeing any of that. I'm with you guys that I just see less and less of this undecided out there simply because these candidates are so dramatically different. So here it is, guys. You've been waiting for it for months, I'm sure. Now's your chance to vote on the show. Who will win the 2020 presidential election? Donald Trump by November 5th. That's allowing 48 hours after the polls close. Joe Biden by November 5th. Donald Trump after November 6th. Joe Biden after November 6th. Just a little hint here. December 14th is when the Electoral College meets. So they need to know by then. And my guess is the Supreme Court will jump in just like they did in 2020 and make sure that the Electoral College knows who has won the general election so that they can do their job. We have Donald Trump after the 6th. We got Charles with by the 5th. Mark Burns C after, Martha A. We got C's and A's. We got Larry Wall at an A. Wow, okay. You guys must be thinking the margin of victory here is going to be pretty big and that we're not going to have to wait for vote counting in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Obviously, if Trump wins enough states, that won't need to happen. We're looking for some more votes here, guys. Anybody else? D, okay, Biden after November 6th. So many of you thinking this is going to be a protracted announcement here. Okay. Anybody else? I'll just keep watching for that as I move forward. Just reminding you guys, subscribe. Okay. We're getting more viewers all the time. Be sure and click the bell so you have notices. Just in case I decide to go live election night, I might. You just never know. But if you have the bell clicked, you'll be aware of that. I expect to be tweeting the night of the election, and I will stay up as long as I'm conscious. Last time I was up till 2 a.m. and I got back up at 4 a.m. I'm not making any promises. I'm going to do the best that I can, but I want to keep you guys informed as to what's going on. So be sure you stay in touch there. The usual ways you can find us. And I always finish by saying from 2 Timothy 1:7, for we have not been given a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. We're going to need that these next few days as the election occurs and the results start coming in. It is my deeply held belief that we will not only survive this pandemic, this election season, and the market turmoil, and we will result in a better nation, a stronger nation. And I think all of us will be glad to see 2020 behind, okay? That's our show for tonight, Thursday, October 29th. A heads up, on Monday, I will be traveling to Nashville, Tennessee. I may actually publish the Monday show on Sunday night because I'll be driving back from Nashville. But I may just also wait and publish it late Monday night. So if you don't see it at the usual 7 p.m. time, have no fear. I'll do it later that night or first thing Tuesday. And I will keep you guys in the loop. I will plan on seeing you from COVID to clarity and politics to sanity. This is CB3 Live.